It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello, and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are talking about the 4 most lesbian pieces of short fiction that have been nominated for the 2024 Nebula Awards.
Yes, we did this by polling 2 people who will remain anonymous about what they thought in ranked order the most lesbian Nebula short fiction nominees were. And then I combined the 2 lists.
Yes.
Highly scientific method.
Yeah. So in order of how we're going to talk about them, we have Katya Vasilyevna and the Second Drowning of Babarechka by Christine Hennelsey. We have Joanna's Bodies by Eugenia Trantafilo, and forgive me if I mangle any of these names. We have The Witch Trap by Jennifer Hudak, and then we have The Vampire by P.H. Lee, a friend of the podcast. So we're going to get the disclaimer out of the way that P.H. Lee, of course, is here all the time. And so you should keep that in mind when we're talking about the story.
Yes.
But do you want to give the sentence-long plot synopses of these stories?
Sure. So first we have Katya Vasilyevna, which is a story about the spirit of a drowned girl and a very undrowned girl and their romance, and whether or not that will be interrupted by the undrowned girl's betrothal. Joanna's Bodies is, as the title suggests, about possession. It is about a girl whose best friend is dead and possessing a series of innocent bodies. The Witch Trap is about a shoe. The Witch Trap was described to me as basically recapitulating the experience of running into some woman at the crystal shop, and she tells you all about her, the awful marriage that she's getting out of and how now she's going to be a lesbian.
Let's not editorialize yet.
But okay, so The Witch Trap is about, it really is, we are the daughters of the witches you couldn't burn bumper sticker in story form.
Yes, that is completely accurate.
And The Vampire is about being a trans feminine, probably girl on Tumblr in like early 2010s and how much that sucked. And also about vampires.
I'd just like to remind you that all these stories can be found online for free.
All right. We're going to skip the do they have wizards, do they have lesbians, because that there's 4 stories that could get a little tedious. So we're just going to jump right into it. Yes,
let's do that. All right. So our first story here is Katya Vasilyevna, and so I have so little to say about this one, and the reason is that it is just very competent. It is extremely Wizards versus Lesbians, almost to a fault.
With one exception, actually.
Yes, which is that the guy is okay.
Right.
The man is decent in this book.
The man is decent.
Which actually makes it feel kind of toothless, honestly.
Yeah, unfortunately, because we're not actually a pro-misandry podcast, but unfortunately, the real problem with this is that everybody is fundamentally decent, and yes, that makes for a very sweet story, but it means that there's no satisfaction to the conflict resolution. And also it makes because it recapitulates all the fairy tale things of how, you throw the comb behind you and it sprouts into a forest. And the thing is that this all feels kind of unnecessary, because this really could have all just been solved if she'd stopped and had a conversation with her husband about how she was, or her fiance about how she was leaving because she doesn't love him. She's in love with the drowned girl who lives in the river. And so I think that that's a real flaw in this story, is that, all of the fairy tale creatures are well-intentioned and fundamentally decent and just want to be friends and ship the main couple real hard and are doing their best to help. And there's no real barrier except, I guess, social expectations that really, if anybody had chosen to push just a little, can be easily overturned.
Yes, this feels like the sort of the creeping edge of coziness overtaking the Wizard versus Lesbians, like the sort of the tide of cozy fiction lapping up on the Wizards versus Lesbian fiction, in a way that I find dispiriting, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, so why should you read this is if you really like fairy tale retellings, but you want everything that makes fairy tales unsettling carefully, surgically removed, then you will genuinely enjoy this because it is a sweet little romance story.
Yes, with no real sense of danger in it whatsoever.
And the thing is, it doesn't even have to be danger in the sense of their lives being imperiled. They're just there's no real risk. So the second drowning of Babarechka is Babarechka basically deciding that she's going to give in to her feelings of love for this girl and, let them sweep her away. But first of all, there's no conflict here because she gets her river and her girl.
Yes.
And second of
all of that happens off stage, incidentally.
Yeah.
The falling in love and the drowning, as it were. She just has to act on it.
Yeah, and also though, there's no sense that the drowning is actually dangerous. Like, if you're going to compare love to drowning, then I want like some of the scary parts of love to be in there too.
Yeah, and also like if you're going to put Baba Yaga in your story, I want to be scared of her. I mean, this seems like very basic stuff. Here like she's scary because she's going to make our heroine build her a house, but the thing is that is a very possible task. That is a task that she's able to do relatively easily, and the point of Baba Yaga is that she gives you impossible tasks. She doesn't play fair, she cheats. That's her whole thing. Now she's an ally in this book. Yes,
and the thing is that when the fairy tale creatures show up to help Babarechka, or Rechka, I don't know, they it's more of, this will speed things up so that you can get to your girl faster, as opposed to you have been given an impossible task and you are helpless in the face of it. So
yes. And this leads me to ask the question, because 3 out of 4 of the stories that we are going to discuss today either are fairy tale based or have a big smack of the fairy tale about them. The 4th one is based on the 2009 comedy horror movie Jennifer's Body by Diablo Cody. But the other 3 are fairy tale reimaginings of various sorts. And the question that one comes to is like, why, besides the fact that it's readily available out of copyright material, does one go to the fairy tale well? And I think that we've done a lot of talk about fairy tales over the course of this podcast, and I think that one thing that I feel relatively secure saying is that the thing that's really good about fairy tales is how weird they are.
Yes.
That is like the primary, like, it's not like the deep archetypal resonances, because it turns out that those were vastly oversold to us by various Jungian scam merchants in the 20th century. And it turns out that living an agrarian lifestyle in the forests of the Black Country is actually quite different from living in the modern world. But what they do have are these fascinating cultural idiosyncrasies in them, and this seems to have been ironed out completely for this one. Like, everything uncomfortable seems to have been ironed out. I know I repeat myself, but it's like, why invoke these images if you're just going to map them on a story that's just like, a cozy romance? I don't get it.
I don't get it either, but I mean, this is also, I do think that there's an audience for this, and so, I lied. I am going to do a why should you read this, which is that I think, this is not to my taste at all, but if what you want from fairy tales is that sort of comforting sense of this reminds me of my childhood and somehow my childhood was pleasant, then again, like, it's sweet. And the writing is thoroughly competent.
Yeah, it's like it's a good story. It's a good length. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. The imagery is nice.
The imagery is very nice. You
can taste the black bread and and all of that good stuff.
Yeah, and actually, that's something that I think this story does really well. Is just it's very vivid. I would love to see this author try to write something a little more unsettling, because she's got a real gift for vivid imagery, and that could work real well if you want to do something a little weirder.
Yeah, from in terms of sheer technical skill, this is probably the best of the four of them. But yes, I would have loved it if that had been put to a slightly more interesting use. I'll put it that way.
All right, I think we're done with this one.
I think we're done with this one. We're gonna speed run through these.
Well,
Well, maybe there'll be more to chew on in the next one.
Right. Part of our problem with this one was that there just wasn't actually a lot to chew on. So.
Yes. Now I would say that there's probably more to chew on with Joanna's Bodies, which is textually a riff on the aforementioned Diablo Cody movie, Jennifer's Body.
It starts it off right away, letting you know.
Yes, and unfortunately, I've already done a cover of Jennifer's Body by Hole for another thing that evoked Jennifer's Body that we've covered, so I can't do that again. I could do another Hole song. Do I have the Courtney Love wail in me right now? Let's find out. And the sky was made of amethyst, and all the stars look just like little fish. You should learn when to go. You should learn how to say no. But I think this one is quite good. Do you want to give the plot summary?
Sure. So Eleni lost her toxic codependent best friend when they were in high school, and digging through her notes back when they were going through their occult phase several years prior, she learns that she can summon Joanna to possess the nearest body, and this works real great for like a couple weeks, at which point the body starts to die, and she has to kick Joanna out and find a new body.
I mean, it doesn't work that great, because that first body that Joanna enters is Eleni's mom, which was not what she was intending to do.
Which is not at all what she was intending to do. She was intending just to summon her and like maybe see her in the mirror or something. Yes. Also, as a result, they've just been like couch surfing in the apartments of all of the people whose, bodies Joanna is possessing, and Eleni is too freaked out to call her mom back. So has, just decided she's never speaking to her mother again, because it would be because having a conversation about how I accidentally almost killed you by putting my best friend's spirit in your body, and then just living like that for a couple weeks, it would just be too awkward, which honestly, relatable.
Yes. No, I felt the problems that these two women are having. This felt both like, internally consistent and emotionally consistent to me as a story.
This is one where I'm glad they're not lesbians, because making them lesbians would actually make this worse. Like, the fact that this is a toxic friendship where they're in this horrible cycle, and like they're not, like, Eleni isn't even getting laid out of it, really, I think actually makes their dynamic even more entertainingly fucked up.
Yes. Although I think that if you do, I think it would be relatively easy to read this as a sort of a crypto lesbian story, in the same way that you could read Jennifer's Body as a crypto lesbian story.
Oh, this is absolutely a crypto lesbian story, but the thing is, it works better. The crypto makes it work better. Yes.
It also means that you don't have to delve into the, it's not Oedipal when it's just girls. What do you even call it? Jocasta? No, there's a dad in there. There isn't a term for the lesbian incest Greek tragedy, fortunately or unfortunately.
The Greeks let us down there.
But the fact that Joanna is initially in Eleni's mom and then is in a series of older women, there's a lot of interesting subtext to be reaped there.
That Eleni keeps sticking her in a series of older women, even though Joanna would really like to possess someone her own age.
Yes, no. I think one of the great things about this is that despite the fact that Joanna is clearly a psychopath, neither of them come off at all well.
No.
These are two extremely unpleasant human beings. I mean, and like from the jump, it seems like they were this way from early childhood. And I think it's nice to just sort of marinate in that. But yeah, no, you could, I mean, the horror reading is textual here, but the other reading is that, these two girls had a codependent, toxic best friendship. And then one of them died. And you could view this as a sort of a very strange, long grieving process on Eleni's part, which eventually
consumes her.
Yes, it eventually leads her to a textual suicide, because she would have preferred that Joanna lived to have lived herself. And I think that the story makes a very good argument that this is because Eleni. This is less because of Joanna's death than because Eleni was already suicidal. That like the feeling that one gets from this book is that the codependent friendship was essentially a coping mechanism for Eleni's depression, from the jump.
Yeah.
And it meant that she never had to develop any like reason to live for herself.
Yeah, especially because the only way that she's able to sort of like Joanna is increasingly marginalizing her and, treating her not only, is and being distancing herself from her while still demanding that she always be available. And the only way that Eleni manages to try to get out of this is by making other friends, at which point she feels so guilty that she's willing to totally ditch her. It sounds like much more pleasant friends, to run, to meet up with Joanna, except at this point Joanna's dead. So she ends up ditching her entire life to keep Joanna alive.
Yeah. And I like that, in Joanna's afterlife, it's clear that Joanna doesn't have much going on for herself either. It's sort of interesting the way that Joanna and Eleni's personalities keep crossing and weaving together, and even their identities keep crossing and weaving together, even before like the textual possession that ends the story.
Yes. Which is incidentally basically a murder-suicide, because Joanna's not going to be able to possess anybody after Eleni's body dies. It's
right.
Just like, it's a murder-suicide with, with 4 to 6 weeks built in. Delay. And also that the murdered person is already dead.
Or it could be the idea that the thing that made the other women like reject Joanna's possession was that they were fighting for their own body. It was a sort of anaphylaxis that was happening textually.
Yeah, the thing is that I feel like eventually Eleni's going to do that, because eventually in her, textually in her life, she starts fighting to get free of Joanna. She's not the thing that makes Eleni such a mess is that neither of them can either put up with each other for very long or fully let go.
Yes. So likely this will end in a pile of rotten meat.
Yes.
But at least for the time being, I don't know if she knows that at that point where she makes it. Well, she doesn't even make the decision. That's the great part about it. It's like her brain automatically goes through the process because she can't get Joanna out of her head because it's such a ingrained thing to keep going back to her, which,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that this is a thing that rings true for anybody who's had a toxic friendship. It's like, it's very hard. It really is sort of like an addiction. It is sort of very hard to not just let your feet take you back to the person,
Mm-hmm.
particularly if you have nothing else in your life. But what I was going to say before was that how Eleni announces to her new friends when she finally gets a young teenage body to strut around in.
Joanna,
yes. How Joanna announces that I'm an artist, I'm gonna do art, which is Eleni's thing.
Right.
It's like Joanna uses the parts of Eleni that are actually functional for herself, and
then completely fails to actually do any art.
yes, but it's it is Joanna taking the parts of Eleni's identity that work for her, and then sort of the phone call with her mom at the very end where her mother mistakes her for Joanna.
And Eleni assumes that this means that Joanna has like permanently broken her mother's brain on the basis the only thing her mother says is Joanna, and then Eleni hangs up on her and writes her off forever.
Right, exactly. I think, there's the sort of like, what if this is all just one person, like an interesting sort of counter reading that this is a sort of a psycho multiple personality situation here.
At which point that would just be Joanna possessing all these bodies.
Yes, exactly. And Joanna is always possessing Eleni, whether she's inside her or not, right?
Right. And I mean, I guess you could also just there's also, I guess, a sort of a reading where Eleni is just straight up murdering these women and living in their house, and like hallucinating Joanna being part of the proceedings. Part of the proceedings. Though I don't think that that's the textual reading, given that like Eleni has really carefully thought through. Okay, so one of the reasons why we target middle-aged women is that when, they're like single middle-aged women, is that if any family or friends show up, you could just say, go away, I'm having some me time, and they'll go away. Yeah.
No, I think one of the reasons that this is my favorite of the four stories that we read here is just there's a lot it gives you a lot of room to play. It's an interesting world that it brings up. There's a lot of like emotional tethers to sort of scenarios around this narrative, and ways to explain it to yourself. I had fun with it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I had fun with it. Mm-hmm. And I think like it's having fun with itself. It is clearly, it is inspired by a horror comedy movie, and it is more horror than comedy, but also pretty funny.
Yes. No, I really do enjoy just what a complete failure of a girl Eleni is. A girl failure, if you will.
Fail woman. She should definitely win some Tumblr fail woman tournament. So yeah, also just the way that she, attempts to target all these mom figures and is like, nope, Joanna's right. I have a mommy complex. I'm still going to do it though. And then is like, no, wait, the woman is looking at me weird. Clearly she suspects that that I'm attempting to possess her with my dead best friend. Clearly she's on to me. That guy over there must be a cop. And it's like, oh, you could really use some medication for your anxiety disorder and your depression.
Yeah, this is tough. I mean, and then you can dial the psychodrama and the horror all the way back and be like, wow, this is certainly what being a teenager with unmedicated anxiety and depression and or young woman, but college age person with unmedicated anxiety and depression and absolutely no support structure feels like, and the couch surfing and the inability to be normal in like normal circumstances and feeling like you're the most visible person.
Also the reveal, because, Joanna's not exactly a Greek name and this is set in Greece, that she just started calling herself Joanna because it sounds cooler.
Yes.
It's great.
I don't know. It's like, I still like to go back to my idea that Joanna is a coping mechanism and Eleni is the real person here.
But who's possessing the women
then? Maybe, I mean, it certainly could still be Joanna, but, did Joanna ever exist for real? Is Eleni possessing people with Joanna? Because Joanna is the entity that haunts her.
Yeah, that could work.
But it also, that's also like, it's part of the Eleni also just feels like Eleni feels like a real human being and Joanna doesn't.
Yeah. Except, at the very end where she realizes that she has possessed Eleni's body, And this, of course, also could just be Eleni projecting still. But the idea that, she feels sad, abandoned even. She doesn't, there's no anger. There's no sense of, oh no, I should try to save my best friend who's trying to sacrifice herself for me. No, she's just like, oh, well, I guess I'm in her body now. Guess she's the dead one.
Yes. No, I mean, it really, it feels like, I mean, I think this is the big strength of the book, is that their relationship almost feels like what two parts of a person should be to one another, not what two separate human beings should be to one another.
Yes.
And I guess that's codependence. So,
yep. So, yeah, no.
So, well done.
Well done. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess now we're going to go to what I think is probably both of our least favorite of the four.
Oh, this one is just funny.
The Witch Trap.
The Witch Trap by Jennifer Hudak. Would you like to give us the...
Why don't you give us
Is there a plot? Okay. So, a woman is... A woman named Elizabeth is having her English country home, her 200-year-old English country home, refurbished. She can afford to do this, but she's kind of upset because the contractor, the man who she's paying to do this for her, calls her Liz instead of Elizabeth. And really, this fills her with what I can only describe as an awakened feminist rage. And she envisions, as she's writing her emails late into the evening, the history of witchcraft and women being persecuted and burnt as witches, and she speculates that the whole witch archetype is real, that women can in fact be witches and in fact are witches, but that's only because they were told they were witches. That created the witch. And so she's going to put on the haunted boot that the contractor found in her floorboards, and she's going to be a witch to him and demand that he call her Elizabeth. And that's the story.
With, a lot of detours into academia.
Yeah, and also men be on their phones.
Well, also, so as a, escaped academic myself, I gotta say that the scene, there's supposed to be this oh no, she's giving her talk, but nobody's paying attention and not very many people showed up, and oh, they were so awful as to give you the early morning slot. And that's just being an academic, friend.
That's what being an academic is, as far as
sometimes you just get the first morning slot, and the only people who show up are your friends, and they're dozing off because it's Sunday morning at 8, and everyone there's a grad student. That's sometimes people call you by nicknames that you don't like. Yeah, it's annoying and it's disappointing, but it's not. I don't feel like this is part of some grand tragedy.
Well, I mean, at this point, it paints a picture of a woman who is so incredibly self-involved and bound up that she can feel threatened and aggressed in this situation. And the only thing that makes sense to me that one could feel threatened and aggressed in this situation is that how dare this working class pleb not treat me as if I am the king of the manor simply because I'm a woman? How dare he think that he can have any kind of human connection or casual feeling between us? And he never said, let me make this clear, that he never does anything that strikes me as in the least bit condescending, negative, aggressive. He's not hitting on her. He's just calling her Liz and showing her something cool that he found.
Right. And then he's like, Leo, last chance. I can put it back if you want.
But it's and the only way that react negatively here makes sense is that how dare you not recognize the class difference between us simply because I'm a woman?
That is kind of the feeling about it. Yeah.
And I'm well, I mean, cool. I wish that it's really cool that she's I don't want to say the author, but the author. It's really cool that the author is self-aware enough to put in a trans teen just, for a paragraph, just to get the stink off it, basically.
That's true. To be like, okay, this is not, I'm not actually a TERF, because this is absolutely the sort of thing that TERFs would like flock to.
Exactly. I'm like, no. You thought I was a TERF, but here's Lunabelle. Lunabelle is here for 4 to 5 paragraphs to be a they them trans witch on the internet. Because this is the definitely the through line between the sort of lesbian separatist misandry cult. It's all the same thing, The witch is always the same witch. The Campbellian the Campbellian archetype is the same.
The witch is always the same witch, and the Puritan man is always the same Puritan man, basically.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter if he's at an academic conference or he's a contractor or...
These things have nothing to do with each other.
Or he's the reporter who's,
who's condescending about this lesbian separatist.
Who's condescending and like, I mean, that is like, the author did a good job of capturing the vibe of one of those sort of weirdly misogynist dude blog type things back from the Obama era.
Where did all the manly journalists go now that Vice is dead? They all got heavily into crypto. I'm assuming that is my favorite thing about it. How the buxom squat, plain woman, that is extremely true to life. And it was incredibly condescending and irritating, and we're glad that is not a thing that is acceptable anymore. But
at least not as much. So also, I have one thing that really annoys me about this story, which is that some of the text is smaller. And I assume that there's something artistic going on here where like the smaller, darker text.
I thought that was just a website formatting issue.
No, I think that the smaller, darker text is supposed to like indicate a different is like the witch speaking or something.
No, it changes from sentence to sentence.
Well, no, exactly. Not the witch like speaking of dialogue, but like things that are aligned with. Because like Lunabelle's name is always smaller.
Surely this is just sloppy formatting.
Except for once. I don't know. And that's the thing is that, okay, so if this is just something really wrong with the website, then okay. If this was supposed to be a deliberate artistic choice, it was a terrible one because it doesn't really show up on mobile, which is where I first read the story. I only noticed it, well, pulling it up on my browser for the podcast. So, yeah, this reminds me of somebody who once, like, grayed out random words in the layout of a role-playing game to write a poem in the grayed out text. Just don't do that. It's really contra all sorts of accessibility issues. And also it looks stupid.
It could potentially be an attempt at one of those readability for dyslexia formatting things. Yeah, I'm going to give the author the benefit of the doubt, and I'm going to say that this is a problem with their formatting and not an intentional choice.
Okay. Cool.
That's just me. That's just me saying that.
Because, like, the other stories, I don't think necessarily do that, though. Admittedly, I haven't looked at the other story. Like, the other pages on the website don't do that.
Fascinating. It doesn't make any sense to me. If it's intentional, it is a bizarre choice.
I agree.
Yeah, no, this is well written enough that if you don't think about it, like if you just sort of let it sort of wash over you, you're like, okay, this is an interesting little bit of angry feminism. On the face of it, I tend to accept, angry feminism. There's plenty to be angry at. But then the more that you think about it, the just how piddling the stakes are and how these historical monstrosities are being, or annoyances, depending on which historical bits we're talking
right.
about, how these historical atrocities / annoyances are being invoked to justify how angry she is about Liz. That's the only thing. And it's like, well, perhaps I will put on the cursed boot because really, I mean, how can I not be a horrible witch under these trying circumstances? And just leave Lunabelle out of it.
Yeah,
sake.
yeah, no, Lunabelle, I wish them all the best in their journey. The other thing is that whenever you bring up Salem, it's just like, guys, there were also men who got killed.
Yes.
As witches.
Yes.
Oh well. All right. I think, are we roughly done with this one?
Yeah. No, I mean, this is very academic, right? This is, I mean, and I say this as a person who has been guilty of this on a number of ways and a number of fronts. And you'll notice that the thing that I immediately did with this was like, this is a feminist text. I will use a Marxist reading on it. Please be advised that if you only have one narrative frame with which you look at the entire world, you will end up making something as dumb as this. Change your narrative frame up. But sorry, what were you going to say?
I don't remember. The Marxist reading blew it right out of my head. Yeah. All right. I think we're. Oh, I will just say about the witch trap is that another thing that this story does very well is that I have absolutely, like, I knew so many of these women in the 90s when I lived in Atlanta, and like my dad, and my dad lived in the alternative neighborhood, and my friends and I would totally go and like poke around the crystal shop because it had sparklies. And so good job. You have really indeed really recaptured the experience of hanging out with those women.
So,
and now for, yes.
The vampire. So Lee, of course, has been a friend of the podcast from the very beginning. And Lee has wanted us to do something that Lee wrote since the beginning of the podcast. And so we're now going to do that. And because I feel that we need to, or at least I need to maintain some element of critical objectivity under the circumstances, I'm going to lay out what I think is my major criticism of this story.
All right, let's start it off with some critique.
So here's my summation of the story is that we are on Tumblr. It is the early 2010s. There is a handy author's note that says the story is set on Tumblr in the early 2010s.
That's a handy content warning.
A huge list of content warnings follows this. So just so we know where it all is, it's 2012. And except in this world, vampires are real, as are werewolves, as we discover later. And vampires are being difficult on Tumblr. Vampires are writing call-out posts. Vampires are doing identity politics. And vampires are using these call-out posts and these identity politics to worm their way into the lives of tween victims, 14-year-old in this case, and do metaphorical rapes on them. And then there are also werewolves who just go awoo on the Tumblr posts.
And, occasionally show up and are nice.
In this case, show up to rescue.
Yes.
To rescue the victim of the vampire at the end, who is a trans girl. So I was there. Were you there in 2012?
Yes.
Were you on Tumblr yet?
Yes,
okay.
Mostly because you kept telling me I should be.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. It was either 2012 or 2013.
It's too late now.
Though really, this really captures Tumblr through 2015. So
at least this captures Tumblr at least through.
This captures Tumblr through the porn until they banned porn.
Yes.
And everyone decammed for Twitter.
I measure Tumblr in my brain in fandom eras. This is definitely through Steven Universe.
Yes.
This is still a very accurate portrait of Tumblr. But my major question is this: who are the vampires? Because I remember being around here, and I think that the thing that I don't really recognize this particular method of predation that that the author is describing here.
Oh, I absolutely do. I mean, not entirely the showing up to your house, though. Honestly, also some of the showing up. People will sometimes show. It would and sometimes overflow into the real world or meet space.
Meet space. Meet space. Why do we no longer say meet space?
But I mean,
yes,
no, this is the vampires, and I think the vampires are vague, but which is actually good because the vampires are just all the people who leveraged a status of one sort or another to prey on vulnerable younger people, mostly younger people.
Right. And so that is why the werewolf says at the end, I have nothing against vampires. It's just, what is it she says? Fucking abusers or something?
Or something like that, yeah.
Yeah, vampires are okay. It's fucking abusers that are disgusting or whatever it is that she says. Oh yeah, here it is. There's nothing wrong with vampires, but there's plenty wrong with abusive pieces of shit, says Mags. And I'm like, okay, but they're vampires.
Right, and I agree that that's definitely a place where the story breaks down a bit, because the vampire metaphor is kind of inherently, predatory. And the story, yes. And the thing is that plenty of people like to use vampires as different kinds of metaphors, as disability, as HIV positive, whatever. But this is really leaning into the vampire as predatory, as predator metaphor, and which is to show up other times in Lee's work as well. Like that's really something that that's a common theme, I think, and whenever vampires show up in their fiction, and I think that line of Mags at the end ends up actually undermining it. Like, because in some ways, the vampire is. I mean, I understand that the point is that the vampire is leveraging their marginalized vampire status, and it is kind of hard to have the story be this baked-in thing of there's no marginalized status that's inherently predatory. There's just people who use marginalized status as a way to basically do affinity scams.
Well, and that's exactly the thing, right? Because I didn't recognize I have marginalized status, so unless you are going to be a bad person, you had better let me in and let me fuck you. I mean, I recognized a certain element of that, but it seemed to me much less common than we are the same. I am part of this marginalized status with you. And unless you want to be the wrong kind of that marginalized status, you better let me in and let me fuck you. That felt like the thing that happened way more often.
Right. The affinity part.
Right. And the thing about it in this case is because, like, a lot of the language and the sort of the specific tone that the vampires take reminds me of nothing so much as online trans women culture on Tumblr at this time. And
which kind of makes sense because Lee is, the main Lee is a trans feminine author writing about a trans feminine character.
In this case particularly, the author is dead. Right. And so, and then, it is convenient to have the vampires to hang that on, but it's not like, let me in because I'm a vampire, and although of course there were, if you don't want to fuck me, that's trans misogynist people. But here we have a case where it's like the vampire, for example, is disappointed that that our hero is trans. The vampire wanted our hero to be a cis girl.
Right.
The vampire insists that
they're straight. The vampire's like, tries to control her pronouns specifically because they don't want to be a straight vampire metaphor, right? Right,
exactly. The vampire is like, the the vampire is, of course, ideologically incoherent, which you could say is absolutely part of the point. The deal with with predatory people who clothe themselves in this kind of right-on language is that the ideology is always secondary to the part where they get to fuck you.
Right. And honestly, that actually, I think that it helps when the vampire... Part of the thing is that the vampire is trying to convince Alexandra, I think her name is, their main character, that she should, in fact, detransition. She hasn't even really transitioned yet, but that she should, change her pronouns back to he, him, and... specifically because the vampire says, I don't want anyone to think I'm one of those straight vampires that are allegories for sexual violence. And I think very specifically, I am a queer, so what I'm doing to you can't be sexual violence is absolutely a feature of this particular social dynamic.
Yes, there is that. I also appreciated the immediate, X 100-year-old vampire calling his victim a pedophile.
Yes.
That's very, the first and last move by any person who's been accused of anything,
right,
on the internet or elsewhere. It goes to the rest of the I'm isolating you from your friends, etc., etc. But like, I think that it was at the end where it fell apart the most for me, and I think that part of that is because who are the werewolves is the next question. Do you often get a biker gang showing up at your door to save you from the pedophiles? Because there are biker gangs that go around trying to save people from pedophiles.
Okay, the thing is that the werewolves are your social circle that's also online and also social justicey, but actually reaches out to save you. And I will say that, because around this time, I hosted a friend of a friend in my apartment in New Jersey for like a week and a half, specifically because they were part of this predatory, abusive, marginalized affinity scam dynamic, and they needed somewhere to escape to, and our mutual friend was like, does anyone have a place they can stay in the New York area? And I was like, well, if they want to come all the way out to Jersey, sure. So like, maybe I like it because I got to be one of the, not Mags, but one of the werewolves who's just sort of there being like, yes, I can be helpful.
Yeah, no, I myself have been the helpful one on a few occasions in a number of different places. And, thank God that we're around. I don't know if I like coercively being assigned werewolf. I've also been the one who has failed to notice the predator in the friend group until after the fact, which may be why I'm a little bit shy about neatly dividing the internet into good guys and bad guys. I've never been the one who keeps defending them after the fact. There's a certain good people test that it's hard to come back from, but none of us are perfect on the internet or otherwise.
Some of this also is just sort of hearkening back. First of all, it's, vampire versus werewolf. But also, I feel that it is kind of appropriate that the person who shows up to save Alexandra is absolutely somebody who had a gajillion wolf posters up in their bedroom wall when they, at like 2 years ago.
Sure. It's the what it says about you if you identify more with werewolves or with vampires. How does your personal morality reflect this?
Right. I think in terms of the metaphorical language in the story, it works because vampires are solitary hunters and the wolves are pack hunters, and thus it's supposed to be healthy community. It's somewhat undermined by the fact that you just know that there's also werewolf packs that are extremely...
vampires may be solitary hunters, but the whole point of the book here is that they're finding community and solidarity online, like so many weird loners did, and they're creating these communities together, which are then able to, stalk, abuse, and dox people together. And I think that part of the thing about the vampire metaphor specifically that does not work for me, is that this was, for the most part, and of course there were always the bad actors who were secretly like, rich and powerful, like your, but
please edit that out. I have a no mentioning.
Okay, I'll tell you what, I'll bleep that out.
Okay.
I'll just bleep the specific word out.
Excellent.
But beyond people...
Still out there and still stalking people, so...
Yes, but beyond people like that... Just to be clear, we weren't necessarily talking about... We could just as easily have been talking about... Or Tumblr user... Who was, of course, responsible for a long-standing feud with... And that spilled over into... And then, of course, there was all of the consequential discussion about things like... True scum... Transtrenders... Neopronouns, and... multiple sexual assault charges. A thing that feels very sort of true and also very essential to this dynamic to me is that so much of this behavior was like frightened, marginalized people getting their very first taste of power, And
I'm not convinced by that, actually. Because I've watched a lot of these people get famous, like nerd famous. And like people who I remember from the LiveJournal days, and their behavior has either stayed the same or escalated.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that the first taste of power is and then you turn away from it. I'm saying that like it's people who are using tiny bits of power in these tiny out of the way communities who absolutely don't have any otherwise. It's not there's something about the vampire analog which suggests that there is something like powerful and irresistible about these people, when in fact they're mostly little psychos who have been abused and are carrying on that abuse. There's like, you could go into like vampire lore about like siring and all of this stuff, but I think it gives them too much credit, to be honest.
So a lot of that vampire lore though is stuff that's, because this is, I think, a thing. I think that part of what Leah's trying to do is go with their other vampire story as well, the Vampire of Kovacs Peter, is trying to sort of bring vampires back to the pre-White Wolf days. Like they're not interested they're less interested in contemporary vampire lore and more interested in like, much older basically vampire folklore back before the 90s. Sure.
So Village Outcast Revenant is sort of what we're looking at here.
Right, exactly. And that's where actually it works.
And on that level, yeah, it does work.
Village Outcast Revenant, who has, the power that they have is over the tiny, isolated town in the woods.
Yeah, no, on that level, I would say that it works.
Like, I agree that there's some metaphorical sloppiness here around the vampires and the werewolves, but I actually think that part works really well.
It's more the conflating of it with a racial identity that sort of gets my hackles up, as it were.
I'm not entirely sure it's supposed to be a racial, I don't think it necessarily has to be a racial identity. I think it's actually supposed to be more of a queer identity. I mean, it's kind of a catch-all, right? But given that the sexuality is baked in and the vampire is very specifically saying, I can do this to you and it isn't bad because we are queer, makes me think that it's supposed to be more of sexuality, gender and sexuality identity.
I keep going back to nothing wrong with vampires, but there's plenty wrong with abusive pieces of shit.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
No, honestly, I think that ends up weakening it, because I think that it is better to let it let it be ambiguous whether or not vampire is really a genuine marginalized identity or whether or not vampire is standing in specifically for the weaponization of marginalized identities and people are claiming it. Because, the thing is that there are sometimes, actual pedophiles, for example, will attempt to weaponize that as a marginalized identity. Not so much anymore, but like Nambla did exist.
Yeah.
And so...
I don't know if that ever worked at all for any period of time.
Oh, no. I mean, it absolutely works in small communities. Mostly, people who prey on like teens and preteens as opposed to children. But it absolutely works because it becomes you're being a homophobe.
Oof.
Yeah. I've absolutely heard people like Marion Zimmer Bradley.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, when you're back in the time when pederasty, as they called it then, and homosexuality were essentially considered to be the same thing, that makes a lot of sense. But since a lot of very good work has been done to separate those two concepts,
I still occasionally see people claiming it on the internet.
Extraordinary.
And so again, I think that. I think that Mags' nothing wrong with vampires line, I agree with you, that actually ends up weakening the story.
Indeed. But having said all that, now I think firmly establishing that I'm trying to be on the mean side of things about my friend. I think the tone is extremely well captured here. I think that it's I really enjoy the teenagers talk like teenagers. The sheer amount of profanity, like if anything, not quite enough.
Yep.
And actually, I wanted to ask, like, does this like the device of like the interstitial fairy tales that sort of just comment on the action as they go, like, this? It seemed familiar to me. Do you know where have you seen this before? I guess is my question, because I was trying to put my finger on it.
I mean, this shows up a lot in Lee's writing in general. They do a lot with fairy tales. Definitely, I don't think that I do not think that they're pioneering this technique. I agree that I've seen it other places. I don't remember exactly where though. So
yeah, it's not me, being like, oh, this is ripping something off. It was just being like, this really reminding me of something, and I can't put my finger on it.
Honestly, it makes it feel more Tumblr-y also. Like, honestly, part of, you know what it feels like? It feels like in a hashtag aesthetic post where you just get random snippets of fairy tales and poetry with like atmospheric pictures and screenshots of Disco Elysium or whatever.
Yeah, no, all of the sort of one paragraph per line thing that we get a lot of here is very AO3 also. It feels a lot like the fic of the era. So, yeah, no, I think that you're onto something there. And apropos of that, I did end up remembering what it reminded me of, which is a piece of Homestuck fan fiction I wrote in 2015. So clearly this is a narrative trick with long antecedents, and I wonder where we both got it from. It's redolent of the period in many different ways.
Yes, I think by and large the fairy tales work. I think actually the very first one, that's just the trans one, works less for me because honestly it's less weird. It's more just, oh, that's Utena, kind of, and every other cross-dressing story, like it's Rosa Versailles.
Yes.
But the others I thought worked quite well. And that is a good example of fairy tales being really weird and unsettling.
And I do enjoy that while this is unflinching about the problems that can happen when you meet people on the internet, it is also very, true that you can also meet your best friends on the internet, and that this can save your life. So really, who can say whether Tumblr is good or bad at the end of the day?
Right. Okay, so one more thing I want to talk about in this story, which is, what do you think about the mom subplot?
I don't know. When I see a bad mom, I'm like, yeah, go ahead, snap her neck.
As the one of the two of us whose bad mom is dead, I actually think it worked fairly well for me in the sense of, but I mean, particularly when I was that age and my mom was an alcoholic, that like, but I still had unresolved things. I don't get to resolve the things.
Well, you don't get to resolve
right,
the things.
you don't get to resolve the things. And so I was not, but I think that I was not particularly sad that the mom's neck got snapped, but at the same time, you know, honestly, it is a good, you don't want to murder in your house, even if maybe they needed killing. But also, I think that Alexandra's reaction is actually a good depiction of what it's like when you're 14 years old and your mother's an addict and your dad kind of isn't around much.
Oh, I don't know. I've yet to talk to a 14-year-old whose alcoholic mother was murdered in front of them, so I'm not entirely sure how accurate the reaction is. But
yeah. No, not murdered in front of her. Murdered overnight, because she comes down and is like, "Wow, my mom is dead." But no, I feel like I'm not sure it entirely works in the context of the story, but I think the thing is that if you don't have the mom, you have to wonder where the mom is.
I guess so. I mean,
I think honestly, just hypnotizing the mom and sort of shoving her in the corner would have been fine.
It did not land as an emotional beat for me, but we are less of a mom and apple pie podcast than many.
I mean, it probably does help that it landed as an emotional beat for me, because when I first read the first draft of the story, I think it was around when my mom died. So,
yeah, well, there you go. Since I didn't formulate this thought at the time, it adds to the nightmare quality of the proceedings, possibly in a way that takes away from the impact of the genuine horror being portrayed. I will ask Lee what the P in Lucifer P Morningstar stands for.
Yes.
And also what the H in Jesus H Christ stands for.
Yeah.
But anyway.
I will also note that it has I really like the piece of art that Tor commissioned to go with the story.
Oh yeah, you know, the hair reminds me of Milo from What Happens Next, and this and the sheer hapless blobbiness of our trans teenage character here also kind of reminded me of Milo from What Happens Next.
Yes, also the just like the giant weepy eyes.
Yeah,
but
and the horrible murder. Yes,
and the old school but also the old school Tumblr layout that they don't have anymore because now they've embedded user pics.
Yes. Well, I hope the Tumblr still exists by the time that this episode comes out.
Right. So do I.
This is something that we always say. It seems like every year it's going to die, and then it somehow squeaks through. So let's just keep hoping.
Yep. All right.
I think that we've managed to record this episode.
Yep.
This was there were challenges here, but I think we made it through.
Yep.
Next is Asunder.
Next, we are doing also another Nebula nominated work of fiction.
Indeed. And then thankfully we can go back to books that nobody's ever heard of.
Okay, yes. All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.